We're going to turn our next session. Now we're going to get into more technical aspects of this work, right? We have had kind of the more, thank you. We've had some of the more philosophical conversations. We've now had a theological conversation. So now it's time for us to get into the technical pieces of this work. And we're going to have a conversation with the states. 3 of the states are present, Virginia and Georgia and North Carolina. Their program directors are here, and the Denali Commission, a former staffer of the Denali Commission. We are so fortunate to have this group join us today, and they're going to be moderated by none other than our own Joe McKinney from NADO. So I'm going to turn it over to him. And if you have to leave, we were supposed to do an hour and a half. The day got kind of crunched down. We had to cut them to 1 hour. If they go over a few minutes, we're going to extend them that opportunity. And if you have to leave, we fully understand. But I'm going to ask that we do indulge them for an extra 10 or 15 minutes if they need it. So thank you for that. And I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
Thank you, Ava. Can everyone hear me okay again? Thumbs up? Okay, good. So Ava, you and I are going to talk afterwards. This is the second time you have placed me directly behind such an impassioned speaker, and I wish he was still here because I really appreciated his commitment and passion to what he's doing. And again, it will shine in comparison to this session because this may be more technical in nature than what we've covered before, but I think it was a good lead-in to process. I mean, I think there's been a lot of discussion today on impact and how can we as a coalition impact the decision-making process of the new Southeast Crescent Commission. So I'm really pleased to be joined by a great panel. I'll introduce them in just a second, but since I get to moderate, I get to also philosophize. I think that's a word that we use in the South. Just a little bit of background of who I am. As I've mentioned, I'm Joe McKinney. I'm the executive director of NADO. Unfortunately, it's not the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's the National Association of Development Organizations. And so we are an association of, it's under the umbrella of development organizations because they go by so many different names nationwide. It can be council of governments, regional councils, area development districts. They go by so many names, but I think the key to all of those and the reason they're under the umbrella is that they're all engaged in community economic development. We have close to 400 nationwide. Certainly in my background is I'm a reformed county and city administrator many years ago. I started my career when I was when I was 21 as a town manager in a town of about 1,800 folks. To say that our community was poor was probably an insult to poor communities in Western North Carolina. We were when you look at the map, the county that I was involved with was certainly had its challenges. One of which, when I was 21 years old, is our water treatment plant. We couldn't grow. We couldn't add one single business. If it was one job, we couldn't add it because we were at capacity. And at that time, I became very familiar with the Appalachian Regional Commission, the federal state commissions. And really that resource was instrumental. Again, I'd mentioned before, it's not necessarily what it brought to the table in terms of dollars, because I think it may have been the least of the federal agencies that we received funding for, but it was the most important in terms of giving credibility to the project. And again, that's 100 years ago. But following that, I also was a regional council director in a couple of states. When I became familiar with the Southeast Crescent Commission, I was down in New Bern, North Carolina, in Eastern North Carolina. And one of the first things I noticed was a glaring omission of a federal state commission. It was just like night and day when projects came up of importance. In Western North Carolina, immediately it was, let's touch base with the Appalachian Regional Commission. And as you know, that are serving in those communities that are outside ARC or Delta, you don't have that resource. And so I became passionate about that, and was telling Ava, I'm in a lot of different roles now that I'm here in DC. I've been here 10 years. I want to see the success of this commission personally, because early on I saw the need, and I look around and there's very few peers that I had that were around back then. So there's a huge, huge education piece that I think is important. And so what I structured today, the session today, was to get those that are engaged in a federal and state partnership to talk about the process of delivery and points of entry that you can have input. And I think that's important. I also, again, another passion of mine, being an old white male, is I grew up in a community that had one Black family. And so I had zero, until I went to college, I didn't understand at all inclusive equity, things like that. But really in college, opened my eyes to a different world. And so ever since then, as a planner, as a director, and all through my career, just the importance of equity inclusion has, again, been something that I've been passionate about. And so I love the fact that the coalition's looking at how do we become engaged, how are we involved. And so we represent the local development districts, and there are many that I think are on here that I'm so glad to see, because I can tell you it is a hidden gem, a hidden layer if you're not familiar with it. There's no decision making at the local development district level. I mean, that's important to understand. Is I don't think you're going to have impact on decision making if you're looking for the local development district to do that. What the local development districts do is the planning function. The planning function, those decisions, as Earl Gold mentioned before, those are made at a state level, since it's a state and federal partnership, and it has to have buy-in on a federal level. What the local development district's role should be, and I'm hoping that this happens, and if not, I would love to hear your experience, but the ones that I've worked with, is they want engagement. They want that participation. They're charged with doing the regional strategic plan of what the economy is, and that changes from region to region, county to county, certainly state to state. And so the beauty to me of the local development districts is those priorities are set at a local and regional level. It's not something that the federal government says you have to do. This is what's important, but those vary. I represent a groups that are engaged in so many different parts of it: transportation, transit, workforce, broadband. So there's no one size fits all with the local development district. It is what the regional priorities are. And so I wanted, again, just to give a little bit of background on my involvement, my engagement with the Southeast Crescent and with the state federal partnerships, because I think there's a lot that you can build on. And I want to kind of point toward those entries of having impact. And so, again, I'm going to turn to the panel who the ones that do this daily. And Chad, I'm glad you could join us, because again, like Earl Gold, you've been one that's been through the trenches and came out the other end successful. But as Ava said, Chad previously worked at the Denali Commission. He currently works with HUD as works for HUD as the representative in Alaska, the field office in Alaska. But I know he has some good thoughts on how to make it successful. We also have Olivia Collier, who represents North Carolina, and I've known Olivia, I guess, since she was 5, because I've looked at her bio, and she's been with North Carolina for more than 15 years, which is surprising. But the thing to note about Olivia and Tamarah and Brittany is this role that they serve is just part of their job. This is not the state has a person full-time that's devoting all their attention to the commission. So they have to manage that role amongst the other roles. And Olivia again, has a background in local government and has been engaged with community economic development on a state level for many years. And a lot of you know Tamarah. I hadn't had a chance to, but I got introduced through Ava and through Olivia, and just looking at her background, I mean, I think it's easy to see why she's so well respected. Again, working for Virginia, this is, I know she works with ARC. I'm not sure that she'll be doing this one, but she's also engaged, again, in broadband. That is probably her full-time job. So it's a small part of what they do, but she's been, again, engaged on a local level and on a state level, and really kind of understands and appreciates that process. And then Brittany, hadn't had a chance to meet her, but just looking at her bio, again, a lot of local leadership, serving as sole commissioner in Georgia. Gosh, where was it, Brittany? I'm sorry. Murray County, I'm sorry. And has since, again, assumed the role in Georgia, helping the local communities with the state and federal partnership. So it's a really great panel, and I appreciate their time. And when I call on them to answer, if I've missed anything in their bio that they feel is essential, I'd love for them to speak up. But just wanted to start, really, I'll start with, let's start with Tamarah, and then we'll go to Olivia and then Brittany, and then Chad. I'll let you talk about your previous role, but just can you explain in layman's terms what your role is with your respective state and how you support the federal and state commissions?
Sure. So I have the pleasure of wearing two hats in Virginia. One, I am the ARC program manager for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I also get to serve as the director of broadband. Now, let me preface that with saying I am a pracademic. I am a community and economic developer by trade. Like, that is my passion. And the reason I got into broadband was because we used Appalachian Regional Commission funding for broadband, right? So then we did it so well that at some point the state asked me to run the state's broadband office. So that's how I actually got into the broadband space. And in terms of like, how do I facilitate within Virginia? I mean, I have a great group of folks that I get the chance to work with at the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development. That is where our ARC program is located. And we actually are one of the few states, I don't know exactly how many, that actually have an office in our Appalachian region in Virginia. So we actually have an arm of our agency that's physically located in Southwest Virginia. And then in terms of experiences with was that the first question or second question? That was it, right, Joe? Okay. All right. So with that, I'll turn it over to Olivia next.
Mayor, I appreciate it. And Joe, you've not known me since I was 5, because then that would have made you probably 8 when we met. I do manage the state's Appalachian Regional Commission program, and like Tamarah, I do a number of other things. Prior to working with ARC, I worked with the Community Development Block Grant program, which I know many of you are familiar with, CBG in your states, and was on the compliance side, and worked with a number of communities across North Carolina to make sure that program went to the individuals that it needed. Like Tamarah said, we work with a number of folks, and there is no day that is the same on who may call and ask for assistance from ARC. And I have 2 staff like Tamarah. I have 2 staff that are actually in the region. We have 2 regional offices where we have community economic development planners that are in Western North Carolina. And their whole purpose is to work with local governments and community organizations to think strategically about the community economic development needs of their region. And we work with them to see if ARC can fund their need. And if we can't with ARC resources, because we do have limited resources, we try to find a funder, whether it's another federal, state, or a philanthropy partner that can help community groups implement their project. We really try to take a bottoms-up approach in helping communities meet their needs. I think I'm turning it over to you now, Brittany.
All right, thank you. And I'm glad to be on the call today. As Joe said, I run the Appalachian Regional Commission program for the state of Georgia. And very much like Joe, I was a part of local government as a sole commissioner. I mean, we had in Northwest Georgia a need to diversify our local economy. When the downturn in the economy hit in 2008, we were struck with a 15% unemployment rate. So we really had to step outside the box. So as a leader in the community, I said, we have to do something different. So we started to implement an inland port in Northwest Georgia, and not a lot of people knew what that was, but I knew it was a way to certainly diversify our local economy so we didn't have all of our eggs in one basket if we ever saw the downturn in the economy as we did then. And so that is what led to me building a relationship with the Appalachian Regional Commission, going out and trying to apply for funding to make that project work, which since has happened and is very successful and is already expanding. But then that led to my job now managing this program for Georgia. And like Olivia and Tamarah, we work hand in hand with our local leaders and with our local development districts from a ground up approach. And we say at the Georgia Department of Community Affairs, our goal is to get to yes. We want to get to yes, and we want to find a way to make a project work.
Don't worry, I bring a Southern accent with me. My name is Chad Stovall. I'm originally from Chattanooga, Tennessee, but have found my way to Alaska. Lifelong dream to come up here. I'm happy to be up here. So thank you for the invitation. I'm tickled to be here. I'm really excited for this commission. I know what magic these regional commissions can be if you use them the right way. So formally, before my job as the field office director for Alaska for HUD, I was the chief operations officer at the Denali Commission. And so, you know, I'm not sure, I think we're going to wait for questions, but just a little quick background about that. You know, we were on a downward trend in funding. We lost our heavy hand in Congress, Senator Ted Stevens. And so we were trying to find a way to be relevant and trying to find a way to really pop and stand out to earn Congress's confidence to restore funding to us so we could do more good in the state. So I'm happy to get into that, and it's really a pleasure to be here, and I really look forward to working with you all. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Chad. Want to move to the planning process, and we've talked a lot today on how the needs of a region are identified, and I think we saw in several of the presentations the approach to that, and local development districts, particularly for the other commissions, have been a method of service delivery from the federal government to the state government to the local level. And so from a resource standpoint, I'd like to pose the question on, to get a better understanding, the local development districts receive some allocation, and it depends on, again, the states decide that allocation, but in most cases, that's less than 100,000 a year, which there's a lot of responsibility goes along with that. In most cases, it goes to support someone on a regional level to assist with the grant concept of taking an idea to a point where it can go to the state for consideration. And so that is part of their job, is to provide that resource, that planning resource. It's done a variety of ways, but just out of curiosity in talking to the four of you, what was that process like? How did you engage with the local development districts on, in any way, whether that's project development or whether that's all the way to here's a grant from our region that is important? So Olivia, I'm gonna throw that to you first.
I'll start. So I think we all kind of do this a little differently, but there are some distinct similarities. The way we do projects in North Carolina, and this is the way ARC generally operates, is that project applications come in general to the three of us from ARC as program managers. We review those applications. Some of us have scoring rubrics, some of us have review teams. Then we make recommendations to our governors, and then ultimately you hope that the governor makes a recommendation to the federal co-chair of ARC. Our current federal co-chair is Gail Manchin. She has the final say on whether a project is approved or not. So I kind of wanted to lay that out there so you kind of got a high-level overview of how projects get funding. How we get to what Brittany said is yes. And I think all of us will agree that our ultimate goal is always yes. Sometimes we don't get to yes, but we try to. The way that we engage in North Carolina with local development districts, local governments, and community partners is sometimes, not always, but sometimes it's that pre-project concept. I will get a phone call from someone that says, hey, we have this idea in our community, we need community paramedics. And so then we will work with our local partners, which oftentimes is a local development district, to sit down with that organization, local government, nonprofit, what have you, to say, is there a strategy around this? Is there a plan around why your community needs this project, why you need a community paramedic, for example? And if there isn't a plan, we work with partners, including local development districts, to help that organization have a plan. I think you've heard over and over today from a number of presenters about the need for capacity. And one thing we look for in understanding an organization's capacity is, has their project been planned out? Or is it just a pie in the sky idea? And so we work with our local development districts to oftentimes write those planning documents, the feasibility plan, the strategic plan. And once we have that, we then again work most of the time with our local development districts when they have the capacity, because they have capacity challenges at times as well, to write the applications, whether it's for ARC, EDA, EPA, state funding, what have you. We work with our development districts because they do often have grant writing capacity to write those grant applications. And once grant applications are submitted, we often go back to the LDDs to make sure the project has regional importance, make sure the right players are at the table. If someone is missing at the table, we work with our local partners to figure out who's missing and who can we add to the project. So I know in North Carolina, and I think Tamarah and Brittany will agree, and Chad from his experience in Alaska, that we rely heavily on our local partners. The four of us cannot be in all of our counties, and there are 100 counties in North Carolina, 31 of which are in ARC's footprint. I obviously cannot be in all 31 counties every day. And so I rely heavily. It's not, if it's not a daily conversation I have with a local partner, it's an every other day conversation. While we've been in this, I've been exchanging emails with one of Joe's former colleagues about several projects that we're trying to get funded. So it's a constant part, and it is a partnership. It is a collaborative process. It isn't just pass the application up and you don't ever hear back. I will say that ARC does not use grants.gov. And many of you that have had to apply through grants.gov for EDA or other funding are probably thankful. We don't use grants.gov. We work with you on your application. Tamarah and Brittany and I and our colleagues, you don't just submit an application, never hear back from you. We're going to come back to you. We may ask you to rewrite part of it. We will work with you to get it where it needs to go. Tamarah, Brittany, do y'all want to add anything?
Sure, I'll add. So in Virginia, we actually have a planning, outreach, and compliance office, and that office actually determines, kind of working with communities across the board. And we provide both financial and non-financial resources to communities in terms of planning. So in Virginia, our applications actually come directly from any eligible applicant that's in the region. Often our planning district commissions, which are our LDDs, often serve as an applicant for some of our communities, especially we're a dealer rule state, so our towns and counties are separate governmental entities in Virginia, so towns are eligible to apply for funding. So often our towns will go through their local planning district to apply for most of our resources as an agency. So we do have a planning, outreach, and compliance office, and that staff is actually made up of folks whose full-time job, and I know Matt Weaver was on here earlier, who will actually be the Southeast Regional Crescent point of contact. Joe, I will not be doing this third job. So Matt Weaver is the person that will be the contact in Virginia for the Southeast Crescent. They work with folks, from concept all the way through implementation. There's not a point in time where we're not holding someone's hand to look at our resources. So as Olivia said, there's a problem, they've identified a need, they've got to figure out the solution. There's a lot of stakeholder engagement locally around planning efforts. While we do fund planning studies, we have capacity building staff whose job is it to go in the region and start having those conversations, because often the struggle is getting everyone on the same song, getting everyone to sing in the same song, just to even identify what are the priorities. So our planning districts play a role in helping communities develop strategies, very similar to what Olivia said in North Carolina, except in our case, the applications come from the eligible applicants directly to the state ARC office in Virginia. Brittany?
Yes, and our applications can come from the recipient or they can come from the development districts. We fund the development districts so much each year to be able to support the local communities and aid them in putting together their applications, because in rural Georgia, we have a lot of communities that are eligible for ARC funding, but unfortunately just don't have the capacity or the wherewithal to be able to put the application together in the way that it needs to be done. And I raise a family in the Appalachian region. So I'm very close to a lot of the communities. We only have 37 communities within Georgia that are eligible for funding, but we work very closely with our communities to try to ensure that we get it right the first time. And we always try to promote planning and strategic investment. We want to ensure that if we are investing in your project, in your community, that there's a bigger plan, or we're part of that bigger plan. And so we try to focus a lot on the strategic planning efforts. And sometimes when we're talking with communities, they just quite aren't ready, and we don't feel like they have the vision or the planning that they needed to have up front in order to be successful. We'll redirect them and we'll fund the strategic plan first, and then come back and fund the project a little later. Chad?
So from Alaska, you know, it's interesting. It seems like there's a lot of parallel thinking that we do in different regions, but the apparatus build out's different for all of us. So, you know, we don't have development districts in most of our state. And so we're really one of about 20 or 30 people that get involved in statewide strategic development planning efforts. And so we have to, you know, one of the things we had to do at the commission, when I went over there to try to rebrand ourselves, is figure out a way to be relevant. And what does it look like systematically to try to bring in a strategic development element? And so our last speaker, Nathaniel, who was, yeah, I agree, he's hard to follow. I should just end at the conference. But the, you know, we had to go into our approach and our marketing strategy with how do we build out that apparatus? And so we were actually pretty much the scouts for the federal agencies. We were able to, you know, basically get the governor and our congressional delegation to tell our federal agencies, hey, line up. And especially this happened when COVID hit. We knew there was going to be a huge slug of money coming into the state, you know, that we needed every bit of it, because we're probably somewhere, you know, in the early 1900s compared to the rest of the nation as far as development goes. So we're really, you know, kind of clawing for every buck we can get in the state. So what we did was had our leaders tell our federal agencies to get in line to work with us on a monthly basis. We assigned a state and a federal lead on broadband and on community development, on economic development. And between those two leads, with state and federal lead, we had a pretty good idea on what was going on. And so if someone wanted to do broadband and they didn't have the funding, you know, until COVID, we were project rich and cash poor with matching funds. With COVID coming, we knew we were going to have that. So we pretty much just started saying, okay, we need to get assessments done. We need to get this stuff going. We need to lay the groundwork, put paper in your hand to open up all these federal funding channels, because they're not going to create new agencies. They're going to run it all through us. And so here's exactly what I need. And so we started putting together quarterly funders calls and facilitators calls. So we would have, you know, one meeting where we had all the federal agencies together and we say, where are your gaps? You know, what's the hardest thing to do to get this funding? You know, what is it? Community capacity? Okay. And we kind of start giving that assessment funding to the appropriate champions in the community. And then, you know, and then we essentially would have funders meetings where we would have kind of a speed dating roll call of all the federal agencies from agriculture to Veterans Affairs and say, this is, I'm Chad, I work with USDA Rural Development, my value added producer grants out. Here's who's eligible, here's what you can use it for, here's the match requirement, here's my contact information, call me if you want to put your proposal. And so we do this quarterly, routinely, to we take the market to our folks rather than try to have them come to us. And it keeps the discussion going well. And that's really kind of how we do planning up here, just because we have villages of 200 folks and, you know, they've been here 20,000 years. They're trying to perpetuate their culture. They're not really worried about, the SF 424 forms being signed, and hell, half of them don't have broadband, so they can't submit that way anyway. So we have to take it by mail or fax it. So anyway, we have some challenges up here, but I think Southern Crescent's going to appreciate some of, starting out new in some of these challenges. So anyway, I'll be quiet. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. And Chad, you hit on a little bit, but I'd like to hear from the other three. How does each state go about developing its priorities? Because I know that's ever changing, but I can tell you the project I talked about when I first got involved was in 1991, and the priorities at that time were water, sewer, roads. That's about it. And certainly we've heard today priorities have changed over time, but how does each state develop those priorities for funding?
I'll go
Brittany, I'm gonna put you
ahead.
first. Yeah.
Every year we get together in a regional meeting with our local development districts and our local leadership to talk about what are the priorities of their organizations? What are the priorities that you're hearing when your boots are on the ground? I mean, those are discussions that we have throughout the year, but we primarily try to focus on the changing priorities as we evolve and as we hit challenges. We know with COVID, our priorities changed quite a bit. When we saw that we didn't have the broadband to extend out for children to do virtual learning, that's an issue. So broadband became a higher priority for us in Georgia. We get with our governor's office. He has priorities that he wants to set forth. So it's done with an ear to the ground at all times, but annually we try to get together and strategize. We actually just had our strategic meeting last week for our upcoming strategy statement to ensure that our priorities are in line with the state and with the governor and with our federal office as well.
I'll go next. So in Virginia, it's twofold. I don't know any other states because I actually grew up in New Jersey, but we change the governor every 4 years. So as Brittany talked about, the governor has their priorities, and then we actually work with our stakeholders to identify what their priorities. And honestly, the way we start off in Virginia, we kind of take what the governor's priorities are for Virginia. And then we kind of take them and we share them with all of our community partners within our ARC region. And we identify within the governor's, more larger strategic priorities, what are the specific priorities for the region. And we do a lot of stakeholder engagement. There's not a point in time where we're not in the region talking to our communities about their priorities. And those priorities, of course, I can't believe I'm going to say the word pivot. So during COVID, despite that we were in the middle of a strategy, because we do these annual strategy statements for ARC once a year, and then these 4-year plans. During COVID, we had to pivot. And one of the things we identified in Southwest Virginia, particularly was an issue, and I heard someone talk about it earlier in one of the breakout sessions, was we didn't have a lot of vaccine clinics in Southwest Virginia. And our local United Way of Southwest Virginia identified this as a need. And they actually came to us and said, hey, we want to figure out a way to increase access to vaccines. We have large manufacturing companies in Southwest Virginia, and we need to try to get folks vaccinated as quickly as possible. And they actually submitted, it was off cycle. So the other thing, I don't know if Olivia and Brittany do this, but we take applications off cycle. So while we do have a yearly application window, if there's a priority within the region that it has an immediate need that needs to be addressed, we will take an application, find some money, and get the project funded. So we're not just take an application once a year and then you got to wait next year. Economic development does not happen in a perfect application cycle, and neither does a pandemic, right? So we definitely work with our communities identifying overarching priorities around, what the governor's priorities are, but then also being able to be flexible at the end of the day to work through those needs and address those needs within your respective communities is really what's important. And ARC is just that flexible. Like I say to everyone, I've been doing federal grants for 21 years. This is the most flexible resource I've ever worked with in my entire career. And I would, if I had to give a note to the new federal co-chair for the Southeast Regional Crescent Commission, I would say be flexible as well.
I'll add on what Brittany and Tamarah said. We too, and I have held my regional meeting last week with our LDD directors and their staffs to think about what our priorities are for the upcoming federal fiscal year. And we do that annually. We are required to submit policy documents that our governors have to agree to annually. And then after they have taken their term in office starts, we have to submit a 4-year development plan that lays out regional priorities, opportunities, challenges. A lot of it is data driven. So we take that data, just like Tamarah mentioned, and we understand what our governor's priorities are. And then we meet with locals and we say, okay, here are the 3 or 4 things that we know. In North Carolina's case, Governor Cooper wants to focus on where do you see the need, the regional and local need? And we really work with that. As Tamarah said, we do have a once a year cycle, but we take projects all the time out of cycle that are priority. Tamarah gave a great example for their region during COVID. We had a similar example in Western North Carolina where we had a collaborative co-op manufacturing facility that was scrambling to figure out how to stay open because everything was shutting down, about a year, 2 years ago. And they had figured out because they were a textile manufacturer, they could pivot to PPE. They could pivot really quickly to making cloth masks and gowns. The challenge was they didn't have the capital because the supply chain costs went up. They didn't have the capital to purchase the gown funding. So we quickly worked with that nonprofit and their local governments, signed off and actually provided matching funds to get a grant to ARC. And I think we got it approved in under 2 weeks to get them the funding. And it was several $100,000 to purchase the fabric that was needed to start making gowns when PPE was, when everybody needed it and nobody could find it. So Tamarah used the word flexible. I think ARC and Brittany would probably agree. I have worked with other federal programs, just as Tamarah, I've worked with the CDBG program. Flexible is not always a word that you would use to describe community development block grant funding, but ARC is very flexible. People always ask me, well, can you pay for this? Can you pay for this? What will you not pay for? And so I always say, what do you need us to pay for? And then we can figure out, can we pay for that? It is designed to be flexible and meet regional and local needs. That is the whole premise of ARC's funding model. And I wanted to add to something Joe mentioned about his time in Western North Carolina. I've often said this as well. It's not necessarily the funding that ARC brings, but it's the partnerships and the collaboration and the fact that when you say ARC is interested in this or ARC is focused on this, where they're researching it, what have you, folks will come to the table, both from other funders, technical assistance providers. They will come to the table when ARC's there. ARC is all about collaboration and partnerships. And I have seen this happen in communities where we haven't put $1 of ARC resources in, but because we convened a meeting, others came to the table and were able to cover the cost of whatever a community needed. And I think the Southeast Crescent will be modeled on that same premise, the collaboration and the partnership and getting folks to the table to talk about what communities need.
Chad, I know you addressed that, and if you had anything else to add on that topic.
Say that one more time, Joe.
Yeah, see, I am Southern. So I said, you touched on it, but I didn't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
You know, Ava asked a question, but I was trying to pay attention. I thought you were going to call on me. So Ava, what was your question?
My question was about specifically about the Denali Commission and how in your governance model, how you have engaged the indigenous population in your governance model for the commission.
Sure. We actually have one of our 6 commissioners besides our federal co-chair is the Alaska Federation of Natives director. So we have a governance on our board, but really most of our work goes, probably 90% of our work goes to rural Alaska, which, you know, we have 226 Alaska Native tribes, which is it's more than half of the federally registered tribes throughout the country. So you know, we have a different model up here. We don't have reservations. We have land grant settlements. And so we actually have Native corporations and nonprofit regional corporations. So, but we work with them on a number of ways besides just trying to align our interest and making sure that they really, I think at the end of the day, probably the biggest value that we bring is something that Olivia touched on. Is basically putting the pieces together right up front, saying, here's what's on the table. You know, we kind of cut through all the bureaucratic stuff and say, here really is what, you know, if you're looking to do something, here's how it's packaged up, here's who we can talk to, you know, how can we strategically develop the project, get to yes. But then there's also the capacity issue. That's probably our biggest Achilles tendon up here is our capacity issues. Because again, we have people that have lived up here for 20,000 years and, you know, asking them for these $14 million sanitation, you know, projects and burden on them. It's tough. So one of the things we try to do is develop out our bench. And what I mean by that is we have a student engagement effort that we run, which is essentially 3 things. We try to get folks interested in public service and public policy, not just federal jobs or state jobs, but nonprofits, really just the engines and the backbones of these rural communities. So one, we talked to them about that. 2, our market is so specific, you know, we don't get a lot of national research done on us. So we have to kind of come up with our own. So tapping into research students. And probably the third most important thing that we do is all of our nonprofits, all of our state apparatus and our federal folks, you know, they all need interns, they all need, you know, assistance, you know, with just whatever. You know, one thing that's the dirty secret about all this funding that's coming out is, you know, we haven't hired the federal workforce to reinforce the amount of funding that's coming out. So, you know, we have the same 1 or 2 people deep in each state that's handling 3 or 4 times the amount of funding. So building out support mechanisms and introducing these young folks from rural areas the experience to practice that public policy in real time. And they're better qualified to go back to their communities and to serve on the boards and to be the mayor and all that stuff. So we work integrally with that as well with our STEM and STEAM technical assistance partners as well. So anyway, I hope that answered your question, Ava.
It did. It is the only other question I was going to ask is in the governance model, like on the boards, advisory boards, do the indigenous people have a direct role in the governance structure of the commission?
So our commissioners help us choose what categories on our federal work plan that we fund, such as broadband, community development, healthcare facilities, energy, village infrastructure protection, which is just code for climate change. So they assign the categories of what we will fund for the year. And they also pick the amounts based on the amount of money that Congress gives to us. And so, they are integral in what our function is as far as, what we fund and how we spend our time.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Joe, you're on mute.
Muted.
That's great. So I said, hey, that's perfect, because it was going to segue into the next question in terms of, and I hope that the panelists will correct me if and when I'm wrong, but as complicated a process as this sounds, there's really 5 points of entry that I think you as a coalition can have impact. One is at the local level, and we've talked about the local development district and the fact that, in my view, and if there's elected officials on, I apologize. If you're a former elected official, you probably agree with me. But the impact, in my view, is not at an elected level position. To have change, it has to be part of the planning process. And equity inclusion is not a process. That's a value that your community has to hold. And I think some of the things I've heard today, you're very passionate about that value. And I think the one method to have impact on that is with the local development districts. There's a planning process. They have, as they develop their plan, a lot of them also receive other federal funding for community and economic development. They have to develop a strategic plan. If you go to a local development district board meeting and say, I want this included, the chances are pretty slim. But if you go to their staff and say, how can I help you? How can I be a resource? I've yet to find anyone say, I don't want you involved, because in a lot of ways, planning is the most boring process in the world. But that's where, in my view, that's where decisions ultimately start. And if you're an elected official, in a lot of cases, you rely on staff to bring you the information to make a decision. And bringing that information is 90% of a decision. That's what elected officials have to go on. So they have planning groups that develop these strategies. Become involved in that. Reach out to your local development district. If you don't know what it is, who it is, feel free to email me. I'll put you in touch. Bear in mind too, a lot of these may not have a clue as to what you're talking about. There's a huge education piece on the Southeast Crescent Commission for LDDs. I mean, this is new. There's a lot of new faces. And so NADO as an organization, we're trying to educate over the next 6 months or so our local development districts on what the Southeast Crescent is. And so if you go and they say, we don't know what we're talking about, that's not surprising to me because it's such a new concept. And so that's the first entry. The second is the local development districts, as we saw in the presentation. A lot of the folks that are on the board of these local development districts are your local elected officials, your mayors, your county commissioners, but it also has business community leaders. If you're an HBCU and you're not engaged with LDD, I beg you to, and I will facilitate any way that interaction, because that is essential and crucial in developing these priorities. The local development district, that's how they develop priorities. They hear from the constituents, they hear from these elected officials. So offer yourself as a resource to your local development districts. let local elected officials know of the importance of the Southeast Crescent. So there's two. The third, in my view, is the most important, and that is the governor. And we talk about federal and state commission. You heard Earl say it today. As federal co-chair, he rarely, in any of the federal co-chairs I've worked with, they rarely approve a project if the governor's not on board. And that's just the reality of it. That's where you can have impact, but it has to be a priority in your state. So whomever you can gather to make it a priority, who can get to your governor and say, this is important for our region, this is why, you have to do that. Without the governor's involvement in the Southeast Crescent, your state's going to fail. It's going to fail. That's the way it's set up, which will lead me to the fifth one. That's the way it's set up. The fourth one is the federal co-chair. And I've been fortunate enough to have a couple conversations with Dr. Reed. You're blessed. You are blessed that you have someone who I think is meticulous in how she wants to develop this new entity. We talked about, I love it, I love her approach in that I'm in an information gathering mode. I'm not going to get on this conference or any conference, we invite her some others, and pontificate on something I know not a lot about. I made that mistake when I first came here. I went to South Carolina, gave a speech that I thought was fantastic. I go back to tell my wife, said, that's the worst speech I've ever heard. And I've backed up and rethought, but I think her approach is great. Be a resource for her. Please be a resource for her. The federal co-chair will never be your enemy. I don't care who's in charge. That person has the ability to set the agenda with the help from the governors. And then the final one, of course, is Congress. If you don't like the structure, if you don't like how it's going, really the only people that can change that structure is your congressional members. They ultimately decide how it's set up. And so as complicated as we've tried to make this, that's the 5 areas that you as a community can impact and have the most impact with the commission. So having said that, I'd love to hear, and Tamarah spoke a little bit about, but what advice would you give to the new federal co-chair as she starts the process? I mean, she's in the process of setting up phones, having an office, getting a website, just on top of like, what are these regional priorities? The administrative part, I'm sure is going to be overwhelming, but just Tamarah and the others, what advice would you give to her early on to help her with that?
Well, you touched on it. Oh, go ahead. Wait, you're going to go, Brittany, go.
I'll be brief. I would just say, as Tamarah said already, one of the great things about the ARC program is that we're flexible and that we can fund just about anything if we can tie it back to the community benefit and economic development. But just be mindful of the partnership and that it is a 3-legged stool. It takes the local, the state, and the federal partners to make it work and to work collaboratively together. So if I had to say anything, give any advice, it would just be to be mindful of those 2 things.
And I think for me, I think one of the things that has come out of the conversation today, and I know we're kind of using ARC as a model, and the ARC is being discussed as a model for SDRC. Okay, y'all do know the ARC region looks very differently than the SDRC region. So let's just, Nate talked about it earlier, right? So be mindful of the history of the effort, because the reason we're on a coalitions conversation today is because unlike the other commissions, I'm not sure about the Denali, this commission was something that was from the bottom up, right? ARC was created in Congress with a whole lot of money. This commission was created very differently from a grassroots effort. So understanding the history and the recognition that, as what Brittany just said, it takes the local, state, and federal partnership, and you guys are the locals. The folks that are on this Zoom call today are the locals, and if you're not connected, I'm just going to repeat what Joe said. If you're not connected to your local development districts, take Joe up on his offer that he connects you so that when it's time and the commission is ready to put boots to the ground, right, that you guys are prepared, and not just for money, because it's not, I mean, great, they're going to need some more money to fund projects, but you've got to build local community capacity, both from a financial standpoint and non-financial standpoint. So that would be my advice. And then also for her to utilize the states. It's very important that the states have a voice. And I know that she recently had a call, I think, with most of our bosses about a week or two ago to start having those conversations at each of the states and kind of where each state stands in terms of their participation and their early commitment to this effort, which by at least my instance for Virginia, we're committed. My boss was at the meeting. We've already got a staffer that's our point person. So we're committed to supporting the commission's efforts. So I just wanted to share that on behalf of Virginia.
I would agree with what both Brittany and Tamarah said. It is a partnership. I think often folks challenge with understanding how the partnership really works. It really is, for ARC's perspective, and this would be for Southeast Crescent, it really is those states representatives getting around a literal table with the federal co-chair, talking about priorities, talking about how we go about building capacity and what the challenges are. The ARC met in DC a couple of weeks ago. I think we had 7 governors in the room with our federal co-chair, and they had a very frank conversation about economic development challenges coming out of COVID and how we deal with that. And so I would encourage Dr. Reed to continue those conversations. And as Tamarah did, she had a meeting of the Southeast Crescent states last Wednesday. Brittany and I and some of our other colleagues were on that call with a few of our governors, and she's planning and she's listening. I think she's being very intentional in really listening to folks. And that would be my advice to her, is just to continue to listen. I know she's been with our colleagues from the Delta Regional Authority as well. She's listening to how they're structured as well as ARC, so that she can take the best things from both commissions and mold it into how the Southeast Crescent will roll out officially.
If I had any advice, probably just to use it, and it sounds like she's well on her way to understanding really where pinch points are and where there's a case for, you know, her to inject herself. And so using that funding the most important way that you can is valuable in the sense that it can help you multiply it, leverage it. But another aspect of that is just, you know, take a multi-year approach that she's going to plant seeds all around communities this year to get you on step for next year's leveraging opportunities. And then when you get, you know, when you pull some of the grants, say it's just this general broadband to bring broadband to the area, you know, is there paper being developed while that consideration is going on for distance learning, telemedicine, education opportunities, you know, community development, common workspace, whatever it is, you know, what does the next set of build out look like, the next phase of the project?
So I'm excited. I see a hand raised of someone that I think could give us some good advice. You heard Jim McCleskey speak, and I just looked at Jim's bio online. It says he's been involved with ARC since the colonial days, which I would question that. But Jim, I'd love to hear from you on this as well. You've been engaged in regional state commissions a very long time.
Well, thanks. And I want to be responsive to that and also to the question Ava just posted on the chat about what the coalition can be doing as the commission starts to take shape. Because I want to say very straightforwardly to all of you, it is in the process of taking shape. The reference to the meeting of last week, we did have a number of the states and governors with their first real conversation with Dr. Reed. I believe she is taking an appropriate and measured approach to getting started here, and it's for several reasons. I think it's to afford opportunity for input, and that's my real response to your question, Ava. And I think, Joe, your 5 points, and in particular, maybe numbers 3 and 5 or 3 and 4 were really strong. The governors, as Ava outlined from the statute, the governors and the federal co-chair are going to have to vote on things like priorities and on a budget and how to put these, frankly, on the front end, very limited resources in play. We are going to need to show some results that generate some momentum for the Congress to then see that it's worth investing more in this, because we are nowhere near a level of impactful investment capital at this stage. We have to both prove ourselves and get more resources kind of all at the same time. So that's a bit of a chicken egg. But the governors are going to have to vote on targeting. We're going to have to vote on prioritization and on what distress means for this commission. Olivia and the other program managers have been really great in gathering information from several of the other regional commissions to look at these questions. The piece we had earlier talking about different ways of looking at distress was really good stuff, and I want to thank the very thoughtful work that's going into this white paper. I'm excited to see the final iteration on that, and none of this is final. It's all a conversation going forward. This has got to be a long-term set of relationships if we're going to build this and really sustain it and really have it make the kind of difference we need it to in this region. I hope that made some sense, but nobody is late and nobody is outside the tent here. The tent is being put up as we speak, and we are so glad to have this chance to exchange ideas, and it will not be the last time. I also want to just say in that regard, and I know I keep going on, the outreach that these program managers do on a regular basis with the stakeholders in the state should not be underestimated. And absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. The fact that we now have a reason to convene around this set of issues and longstanding problems in this region is why we're here. And so just stick with us and speak up. Democracy works for those who show up. And I know that's a loaded thing to say in this day and age, but keep showing up, y'all. We need everybody.
Thanks, Jim. And Ava, I'm ending it. First, I want to thank the panelists, Chad, Brittany, Olivia, and Tamarah. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to end by just giving you a bit of hope, and that is, as a lot of the local development districts are also economic development districts through Department of Commerce. If you're not familiar with Economic Development Administration, I would encourage you to. There are resources as well. But their priorities are set by each administration. And we work with our members to make sure those priorities are included. They have to be included in their economic development regional plan. I was just going to real quickly tell you that this administration's 7 priorities from the bottom to the top: exports and federal direct investment, environmentally sustainable development, technology-based economic development, manufacturing, workforce development, recovery and resilience. And the number 1 priority of the administration is equity. Economic development planning on or implementation projects that advance equity access across America through investments that directly benefit one or more traditional underserved populations, but not included, but not limited to women, Black, Latino, and Indigenous, Native American persons, Asians, Americans, Pacific Islanders. 2, underserved communities within geographies that have been systematically and or systematically denied a full opportunity to participate in all aspects of economic prosperity, such as tribal lands, persistent counties, and rural communities with demonstrated historical underservice. So that is the priority of local government or local development districts. If they're an economic development district, they have to address this in their development plans. They need help. They're not gonna, we try as an organization to provide guidance, but they need it. Again, it's a local plan. It is your communities that are developing this, and you obviously have an interest, and you have certainly with the study that's coming out, you have data, you have everything that I think can be a valuable resource to those local government or local development districts. So with that, Ava, back to you. Thanks so much for, again, the panelists and for everyone that's participated today.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for all the panelists for your contributions. This was very necessary. I think that session was kind of the segue that we need. The conversations that have happened over the last 3 years now, almost 3 years, have been very important since 2019. We started out in 2019 talking about what we needed to do together as a region to finally bring this commission to fruition. That now being done, we're at the beginning of this process. I think if we heard anything throughout the course of the day, what we learned is that we are literally now at the beginning. We were below the surface before, and now we are literally at the foundation of what it will take to build economic resilience in this region. It will take every single one of you. It will take every perspective. It will take every voice. It will take conventional economic development. It will take comprehensive economic development. As Nate said, it will take housing, it will take economic development, it will take job creation, workforce development. It will take all of those pieces to make this region more resilient and with some sustained economic investment. One of the things that I think we can do as a coalition going forward is to do our best to transfer the knowledge that we've heard today to the communities that need it, right? Because as we move forward, there will be resources, as you've heard, even though Jim says we are nowhere near, I think we all agree that we are nowhere near the level of investment that this commission will need to make the meaningful impact that we hope that it will make. But we are also not ready yet to fully engage the resources as they come. So the commission has work to do, and we want to be here to support the commission in getting stood up and getting the meaningful investment, that appropriation that it needs, so that it can make the meaningful investment. On our side, it is not the commission's job to prepare us. It is our job to prepare ourselves for the resources of the commission. We can make requests, we can ask for funding, but we have to do the work. And so one of the things I'd like to ask you to do is when you get the feedback, you'll get the video from this event, you'll get all the presentations, go back and look at parts of it again, take some time to think about it, and give us some feedback on what this coalition can do to give you the support that you need to build the capacity to be prepared for this for the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission as it comes. I have some ideas. I'll be calling on some of you for training and technical assistance, and we want to make those things available to you. So please avail yourselves of those resources as you see them coming. Thank you for this time. I see your hand raised, Frank. If you wanted to say something before we close out, please do so.
Thank you. Just one quick building on what you just said. I think one thing that could be really helpful to us, because we're talking about it here in Georgia through New Georgia Project where I work, is providing some tools to build structures in the county, community structures for planning and involvement. It's like putting democracy to work at that very base level. So feeding back into their county commission, their regional planning commission, sort of like what we did with the empowerment zone enterprise community back in the 90s. With the Clinton administration, we built those groups in every county. Every county had a planning group, and we got a lot more people going to county commission meetings and going to the regional development meetings than ever had happened before, because they saw this being important input, because they realized these folks were going to be making bigger plans for their county. And this may be a great opportunity for us to kind of revive democracy, I call it, by using that county structure, since every state has it. It's something that could be done in any state, is building, county groups.
Thank you for that. Before we leave, I want to thank our co-hosts. I want to thank EPA and all of the staff. There are too many to name. Mark Fight. I want to thank Daniel Blackman for his riveting presentation this morning. Tammy Thomas, Brian Houseclaw, all of the staff at EPA, Shitra, thank you so much. I want to thank Alicia Kramer and Dealey Wilkins for your amazing support on tech today at U.S. Endowment. Dr. Veronica Womack from the Rural Studies Institute at Georgia College, thank you for being a co-host. Of course, Seep and Jenny and Sarah Beth, thank you for your support and commissioning this amazing white paper. I think it gives us a position to start the conversation that needs to be had around this region. And Joe McKinney from NADO, thank you for your leadership. We need all hands on deck, and thank you for kind of being willing to step out with us in this place where we're trying to figure out how to move this region forward and do it collaboratively. And I am grateful. I hope that this coalition, this has been a journey. I did not start out to convene a coalition. I started out asking questions about why aren't we doing this, right? And Joe was there, he heard me ask it. And Jim was there and some others of you. But I am very mindful that how important this coalition is. And I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share with you. And I don't take this experience nor this opportunity lightly to bring all of your voices together, any opportunity that we can to talk about how we move our region forward. I'm so grateful for all the y'alls I've heard today. We don't get to have a lot of places where we can just y'all and be okay with it. So thank you all for doing this. And I look forward to seeing you all again. And if there are no hands raised, did you have your hand raised, Dealy?
Nope, just clapping for the y'alls.
Clapping. Okay, and what about you, Chad? I see a hand. Thank you. Thank you all so much. If there are no further comments or questions, thank you for joining us, and we will do something again very soon. Thank you for spending this very long day with us.